Hey there, I'm Jess, and it is so great to be here with you for a few moments today. I want to welcome you to Kingston Standard Church, our online version, and if you're here with us for the first time or returning to our channel, you know that we've got a variety of different resources that are available to you and your families, both on Facebook and YouTube. All you have to do is just search up Kingston Standard Church Cabin Kids, and our YouTube channel will pop up, and our Facebook page is linked there as well. And that has loads of interactive resources for families and kids, both to use today and really any week of the year. So please feel free to go and check that out. As part of our mission as a church, we want to equip parents for the conversations that they have with their families as they grow together in Christ. And the way in which we're able to do that is through connecting the themes and scriptures together through our family videos. So I would love to invite you to connect with us either online or in person. Hey, come on out, we'd love to see you. But in the description box below, you'll have the link for our website so you can get some more information there. Otherwise, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Kingston Standard Church or Kingston Standard Church Cabin Kids, and you'll get all the latest info there, as well as on Facebook. You can find even more information. So if you want to touch base personally with any prayer requests or questions you might have, you are more than welcome to send us an email or a message on Facebook, and we'll get back to you. Otherwise, here's our address. So we would love to see you. This month we've been exploring forgiveness. We are so thankful that when we mess up, God forgives us. And this is a part of grace that we love. There's a part of grace, though, that's a little bit harder for us, and that's when God calls us to forgive others. We tend to want grace for us, but we want justice for others. And we can feel like they deserve what they're getting, right? But we also got to wrestle with the fact that Jesus chose to forgive those who were a part of killing him on the cross. We have the ability, though, to decide that when someone has wronged us, that they don't have to pay. And with God's help, we can be free from the anger and bitterness while still giving someone else the same gift that we would want. So, let's do it. Let's wrap up this series with Pastor Rob and see what we can learn today.
You may have heard of the grandfather who was known to be rather grumpy, I guess we could say. He'd grumble through things and generally just huff through most of life. Well, one day, his mischievous grandchildren got hold of some stinky cheese. And while he was napping on the couch, they gently rubbed some of this cheese into his mustache. Well, then, when he woke up, obviously he noticed the odor and kind of sniffed a little bit and said, something stinks around here. I'm not sure what this is. And he got up and wandered around the room and sniffed some more, and something stinks in this room. And then he walked around the house, and this whole house stinks. Meanwhile, his wife and his grandkids were all kind of tucked away out of view so that he couldn't see them, doubled over in laughter. He steps outside, and after a few sniffs, he declares, "Everything stinks. The whole world, it just stinks." Now, we've all had moments where we have been on the outside and watching something like this, and maybe we've understood the joke or been able to comprehend that there's been some kind of a problem. But it's a lot easier to see when it's someone else, isn't it? It can be harder when we're the ones in the middle of it and seeing things clearly when there's a challenge or some kind of issue that originates with us. So what do we do then if we need to be helped to see what's going on behind the scenes in our own lives? Now, Jesus has been traveling around, and he's sharing the beauty of life in connection with him, and his activity is stirring things up, to say the least. And so here's an exchange that really is designed to give the religious leaders a different perspective, maybe even see things from a different angle in order to comprehend that the smell that they were complaining about was actually originating in them. So Jesus points this out to them, and this is the third part of a three-part story progression that Jesus shares, and Luke writes it down and recounts it in chapter 15. Just prior to this, Jesus tells a very familiar story about lost sheep and a lost coin. And now he jumps in and talks about a lost son. Let's check it out. It starts in verse 11 of chapter 15. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. So a few days later, this younger son packed up all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. Now, in the culture of the day, the younger son would have inherited a third of the entire estate. The oldest, by tradition, would have inherited 2/3 of the estate. This was a common practice related to inheritance around this time. So it clearly was not just about the money, but it was actually about getting the father out of his life. Verse 14 continues, about the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. Now, for Jesus' audience, this would have been an extremely disgusting situation. Not only was he working with animals, pigs, that were considered ceremonially unclean, unacceptable to God, but he was thinking about eating what they ate. Now, this was not a moment where really they would feel any kind of pity for this young man at all. The mindset of those who would have been present was probably somewhere along the lines of, well, seems like he's getting what he deserved for the way he dishonored his father and then squandered life. Boy, he's just kind of dealing with the consequences of his actions. And the downward spiral of such a scandalous situation, it would have been indefensible in the minds of the listeners. So verse 17 continues, when he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, the hired servants have food enough to spare, and I'm here dying of hunger. I'll go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. Now, this is one of Jesus' most famous parables, and since we're so familiar with it, we can often miss some of the nuances of what Jesus was sharing here. And he's pressing some pretty specific cultural buttons in this as he shares. So as I read, I'm going to just kind of interject a few things that are important for us to understand how extra spicy this really was for the people who heard it first. Verse 20 continues. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Now we need to know that this is completely out of character for any man who had money in Jesus' day. No man of means in that culture would ever consider running. And considering the unclean history that his son had, there would be no circumstances where that would involve an embrace or even offer this kiss of blessing that would be part of the greeting. But it continues. Verse 21, his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But the father said to the servants, Quick! Bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. Now, just when the people who were listening were thinking, yeah, you know what, that's right. I mean, he's not really much of a son anymore. All of a sudden the tables start turning and a robe is given to him. This is a robe that would have ceremonially been for a guest of honor in the household. And this ring is a declaration of belonging as a son. Think along the lines of maybe like a signet ring that lets him prove his standing in the family and that he's able to speak for the family as well. And to be shoeless in his generation meant that you were a slave or poor. And this is really what he deserves. So these shoes continue to raise his status further. No matter where he is, he will never be considered a servant or a slave, even though that is what he deserves. So the response alone of the father would have blown them away. Considering the offense of demanding an inheritance early, leaving home, this son doesn't deserve any kind of restoration. But as you know, it keeps going. Verse 23 says, Kill the calf that we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For the son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found. So the party began. Now, most people in Jesus' day who were people of means were always preparing a few animals for feasts. Some of them were smaller animals, some of them were larger animals. This calf would have been a special moment that they would have been looking for. And so the father says, this is the moment we've been waiting for. Our son has come home. Verse 25 continues, Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. Now, it's interesting here that word was not immediately sent to him while he was working in the field, right? I mean, it might have been observed as an offense here. But in verse 28, the older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, All these years, I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never gave me even one goat for a feast with my friends. Yet, when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. Now it's curious, isn't it, how even in the telling of the story, Jesus uses language here that kind of dehumanizes the younger brother. He doesn't refer to him as my brother, he refers to him more as this irresponsible son of yours. He's getting more honor than I am, and I've always done what you've required of me. But this is really the current reality of the religious leaders, isn't it? I mean, there are people that have kind of held the whole thing together, the ones who have given and slaved and held the doors open on faith in Israel, and they're hardly even being recognized or valued like they didn't even exist. Jesus is spending all his time with tax collectors and sinners. Verse 31 says, His father said to him, Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He's lost, but now he's found. One author made an observation about this particular moment. So we have two sons, one bad by conventional standards and one good, yet both are alienated from the father. The father has to go out and invite each of them to come into the feast of his love. So there's not just one lost son in this parable, there are two. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? You know, this parable gives us a lot to really wrestle with, and we're going to explore a couple of different avenues of that here in the next few moments as we have been exploring this month about forgiveness. And Jesus in this passage is really sharing a picture of the heart of God, and we get to see it in a mind-blowing kind of grace, a grace that is in continuous pursuit of the ones who are lost. as we understand from even the earlier stories, which may be familiar to you, of the lost sheep or the lost coin, or now the lost sons. And what he's helping us to understand is this first part we want to think about, and that is the grace that flows from the heart of God. It draws us in. Now, many of the people who are listening probably would have understood, God as a judge, that he was distant, maybe even feels a little unapproachable. Some of us, when we think about God, might think about him the same way. There's probably a mixed bag of thinking for us. And a lot of our thoughts about God are actually transferred from our experiences with our own earthly fathers, some of whom were absent, some were dismissive, some were pandering or present, some were helpful or even permissive, some were distant. So God as Father, here in this passage, is revealed as engaged and loving and sacrificial, most definitely approachable. And how he shares his unearned love is actually kind of mind-blowing. But this is the challenging part of grace for us, and that is that it really isn't fair. Grace is extended to the nasty son, to the sheep that wanders, and to the one coin out of 10 that was lost. It's shared here in Jesus' stories to the neglect of all of those other things that were not lost. In the case of the lost son, we mentioned how those listening would have been repulsed by his actions, how he showed a complete disregard for his father. But equally, they would have been offended by how quickly the father reintegrated the son into his circle. For the people listening, this kind of grace was incomprehensible. But we have to wrestle with it too. We approach it maybe a little differently. Consider the perspective of this one author. Since God is omniscient, meaning he's all-knowing, he alone knows everything that happened to the rapist, all that caused that man to become a rapist. He's still at fault for what he did, and he made some terrible choices en route to such a terrible crime. But God is able to forgive the rapist because he knows what led up to the man committing such a terrible sin. Now this hits a little closer to home for us as it relates to incomprehensible grace. This is grace that is kind of uncomfortable. It's a grace that when we know that God completely forgives, well, we love that for us, but his restoration, including crimes like this that are so controversial, boy, we really have to wrestle with that. And part of our challenge comes from the other part that Jesus is helping us to see, and that is, in here, there's a problem of what we deserve. And sometimes that keeps us away, even causes us to push away. Because as humans, we have this scale of offenses, right? Our scale often ranges from, on the one side, these are catastrophically egregious things. And on the other side, well, these are mildly inconvenient things that are a part of the offenses that we experience in life. Well, when our justice and our sense of justice comes into conflict with God's grace, because on the one hand, we see ourselves in a way where maybe our offenses are completely egregious. And we may even believe that they're unforgivable. We see what we deserve, and maybe we think, like the younger son, that we will be treated as an outsider. What we deserve is condemnation, isolation, maybe even rejection. And sometimes as we kind of wrestle with this, it shows up in our lives as self-hatred or avoiding situations that cause us to come into view with the grace of God. It can even cause us to build up an animosity, feeling like we're mad at God because these things are so egregious, we think he's going to reject us. It's the shame that we feel we deserve that keeps us at a distance. That's when we need the image of the Father running toward us, because he knows the ugliest part of us and still loves and forgives. But it's also that messes with the older brother. And after what he did, this younger brother, he doesn't deserve any kind of special treatment. Furthermore, the older brother would believe that the father is dishonoring him by not appreciating the loyalty that he's given, by giving him such a warm welcome and coming back and restoring him. But in the process of wrestling, the older brother has pushed the father away too, because he's focused on what he believes he deserves, comparing what others receive based on how good he is, not compared to the grace of God. So Jesus' parable here reminds us that the ones who are truly lost may actually be the ones who don't realize that they are the ones in need. Like the man with the stinky cheese in his mustache, he doesn't realize he's his own problem. So from the outside looking in, we can see this. We can see it with the grumpy man and the stinky cheese. We can see it with the older brother, because he measures these offenses and they keep him at a distance, kind of rejecting the invitation of the Father because of how good he is and what he thinks he deserves. So his response becomes to be judgmental. He's repulsed and ends up abandoning the family when they probably need him most, because, as we've said, the grace of God feels completely unfair. One knows they stink, the other thinks it's everyone else who stinks, and both are equally lost. So, when does our older brother mode start to rear its ugly head in our lives? That place where this tension of the grace of God and the problem of what we think we deserve is revealed in us. Do we see it? Do we appreciate it in the moment that we're in? Or does everybody around us see it and we kind of miss it? Sometimes when people close to us mess up, someone we love or someone we know, leaders we follow, in the moments that may even follow that have some genuine repentance to them, seeking some kind of path of restoration, it's pretty easy for us to get judgmental, isn't it? As if we're somehow immune to what has happened in their life. I've said it before, but oftentimes when people sin differently than we do, we feel pretty free to pile on. And those self-righteous moments, boy, they're pretty dangerous for us. They're times that kind of express themselves with statements like, how dare they? Or who do they think they are? Maybe we even come out with I never really trusted them in the first place. And as a result, they're left abandoned in a time when they need people the most. I would admit that over the last number of years, I had to have God work in me to release a lot of that kind of judgmentalism. I've been pretty good over the course of my life at thinking those kind of thoughts I just mentioned. They're getting what they deserve. They're such idiots for the way they behaved. I don't even like them because of their actions. Now, people do bear consequences for their actions, but if our righteous indignation leads us to scathing comments and gossip and isolating them, well, we may have actually found our inner older brother. It's like we're looking for some kind of pat on the back because we've measured out our goodness instead of theirs and found ourselves to be superior. My heart has to change, and my heart is continuing to change as I wrestle with this tension of grace that I want for me, and I also long for in others as well. Because that older brother mode, that just comes to us all. It's in us. And it emerges at some very challenging times in life. But the younger brother mode is in us too, right? We ask the question, will God accept me? Will anyone else accept me if they really knew my darkest moments, my thoughts? I've often noticed, and maybe you have too, on the temptation side of life, the message coming our way seems to be like, well, there's no big deal. You know, this is not a big problem. Just go for it. There won't be that much to it. But on the other side, often the message is more like, are you kidding? How can God ever accept you now? And that's when, as we mentioned, we need the image of the Father running toward us with an embrace of acceptance and a kiss of blessing, welcoming us as a guest of honor and restoring us to belonging within the family. As we mentioned, this parable shows God's grace, and it's demonstrated in the actions of the Father. And we see how it embraces both the returning sinner and the proud, self-righteous one as well. So, as we wrestle with this grace that pursues and really is just not fair, and we wrestle with this problem of what we think we deserve, they're part of all of our journeys. So where do we find ourselves on this picture of grace? Do we measure our offenses in ways that kind of make us look good? Here's one way to test it. The next time you hear about some egregious offense, check your response. Is it one of immediate disgust and condemnation, of pushing away from those people? Or does it break your heart for the offended and for the offender? Our reflex in that moment may actually reveal, while we're pointing the finger elsewhere, that the odor could be closer to us than what we really realize. Let me pray with us today. Jesus, this is a very challenging passage, and there's so many things that are unresolved for us today. As we recognize that our inner older brother emerges from time to time, and inadvertently we push away from you because of how self-righteous we think we are. And then there are times when our inner younger brother emerges, and we wonder if we could ever be acceptable to you. And so, God, today, I thank you for the image of the Father who is inviting both back to himself. God, as we wrestle with this part of grace that's unfair, I pray that you would help us to understand your heart, and maybe even have our heart look more like your heart as we grow through and yield judgmentalism in our lives and respond to your welcome in us. We thank you and we praise you for the reality of your grace. We're so thankful for it for us. I pray that you'd help us to appreciate it for others in the same way. We love you today. In your name, amen.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you are getting all the notifications for the new content when it's posted, both Kingston Standard Church and Kingston Standard Church Cabin Kids. And if you're watching this on Facebook, then hey, give it a like and a follow, so then again, you're up to date with everything new that's going on. It would mean so much to us that if you enjoyed the message today, that you give it a like, comment, share it, so that other people are able to listen as well. And if you happen to be in the Kingston area, please come out. We would love to see you in person. If you're limited to online connection though, no worries, all right? Just be sure to check out our website for more information and resources for at-home worship. Like I mentioned before, in the description box below, you're gonna have the link to our website and other helpful resources for you and for your families. But please know that you are loved and that we are praying for you. And we certainly appreciate your prayers too. So have a good one, and we hope to see you soon.